Thank you, Monica, and a warm welcome from me also here to Vattenfall and Energiehuset and to this seminar about the energy transition in Europe. Yes, most seminars here in Almedalen are of course in Swedish, but this one is an exception and it's in English. And the reason is that there is so much interesting things going on in many European countries when it comes to the energy transition. So we thought, why not bring some of these perspectives here to Almedalen? So we're very happy that we have three very distinguished international guests with us here from the UK, from the Netherlands, and from Germany. So hopefully at the end of this seminar, you will get some inspiration and maybe find some things that we can copy into the Swedish arena. But I also would like to inform you that if you're wondering what I'm holding in my hand, this cube is a microphone. And at the end here, you will be invited in the audience to ask questions. And I will throw this microphone to you. And if you then state your name and the company you represent or the organization you represent and ask your question. But without further ado, I'd like to start by welcoming Magnus Hall, President and CEO of Vattenfall, up on stage. Please give him a warm hand.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you, Karin.
So, Magnus, you will see here on the big screen behind us a pie chart. This shows the energy mix in Sweden. And as the other representatives enter the stage, we will add on pie charts for those countries as well. So this is now the Swedish energy mix. So Magnus, if you then represent for a moment Sweden and talk about the development in the recent years and perhaps currently when it comes to the energy sector, what are the most important developments?
Yes, I'll do that. Just before that, I think it's good to comment a little bit on the Swedish situation because it's quite unique in the sense that we are almost virtually fossil-free from the beginning. And the reason is, of course, that we are richly endowed with hydropower as a base. And then we also took a decision to develop nuclear in our country. And that was really to stop the oil import. And there were plans to use coal and everything in Sweden, but we didn't. We made it a nuclear track. Then we have built wind, and we have also the district heating electricity production in there. So it's a very good start. And we also had some, of course, long-term issues around nuclear and other things in Sweden. There was a commission, a broad commission in the Swedish parliament, which negotiated a long-term deal, which means really we have a role for nuclear, we have a role how to develop new renewables, there is a role for hydropower. So I think we have a very strong position.
And the fact that it goes across the different parties, where actually 5 parties are...
It's about 75% of the Swedish parliament that agreed on that. And that is giving us the long-term investment sort of incentives in a sense of stability, which I think is for our industry it's absolute prerequisite.
So that's a good foundation, the starting point with the energy mix and the broad sort of political agreement. But what are the most important topics then today for us to make it happen, so to speak?
Well, it's really then not about the transition of the electricity production system, which it is in many other countries, and I'm sure we will hear about that today discussing these markets. But for us, it's now a concentration on where do we have our climate issues, and that's in transportation, that's in industry, agriculture, and so we need to address them from a perspective where we use, and it's of course about electrification, right? We use electricity to turn this system into a climate neutral system, and that's where we have the challenges, but that also means that we have a good development in Sweden regarding new ideas, I think.
So what concrete sort of bottlenecks or what's needed for this electrification then?
Well, it's very much about new technology being developed, but it's also about the electricity grid in Sweden being developed so that we can actually transport the electricity from where we produce it to where it's being needed. This is now next big discussion coming up in our country, but parallel with that, we are of course looking at electrification of transportation, electrification of several industry processes, which I think are then sort of based on fossil-free electricity is what we can see as a long-term good solution for us.
So this was more looking at it from a Swedish perspective. If you then step into your CEO role of Vattenfall, being an energy company, of course, politics and policy development is very important. and Vattenfall has operations in several countries. If you look at your experience from other countries, what could sort of Swedish stakeholders learn from the other countries, do you think?
Well, let's start with the fact that we as a company want our customers and stakeholders to live without fossil fuels within one generation.
Yes.
So it's really a commitment. And that, as a company, we do have fossil-based sources of energy production in other countries, and we need to make that solution. What is important to me to tell us in Sweden is that we have a different transition in Sweden than we have on the continent.
Right.
Those are big challenges, and they're not challenges only involving the change from one energy production way to another. It's also involving big-time change for people, society, which it's really a much tougher turnaround that they need. And I think for Sweden, as part of the European Union, to understand and support that change is really important in the sense that the climate issues, CO2 emissions, are not local, they are really global. And of course, on a European Union level, that is very important, that we are part of helping Europe to solve those issues.
All right, so I think that's a nice bridge over. So let's hear from some of these countries in Europe and see what the developments are in those countries. So it's a great pleasure to welcome up on stage first the Deputy Director General of Climate and Energy Policy of the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate, Birgitta Westgren. Welcome. Please give her a warm hand.
Thank
you.
You
can sit down next to Magnus, perhaps. So, Birgitta, before we jump into the energy mix and the developments in the Netherlands, you have such a Swedish-sounding name. I'm sure many in the audience perhaps wonder about your background. You represent the Netherlands, but you have a Swedish-sounding name.
Yes, actually I'm half Swedish and half Dutch, so I was born in Stockholm and raised in the Netherlands.
Okay.
So very nice for me to be here today.
Very good. Pleasure to have you. So, from a Dutch perspective, in the last couple of years, you have been developing a climate and energy agreement in the Netherlands, quite successfully so. And we had an important date only last week when it comes to that, right? Tell us about that, please.
Yes, well, maybe first of all, it's important to tell that we also passed a Climate Act 2 weeks ago, which is very important in the Netherlands.
So what's the Climate Act?
Yeah, it states that we have a target of 95% carbon reduction by 2050.
Yeah.
And there's also a target we strive for in 2030, 49% CO2 reduction, and then electricity by 2050 should also be totally climate neutral.
And of course, for the audience, then you can see that that's quite a challenge given the current situation.
Yeah, that's a huge challenge. So the act is basically on what we want to achieve. The agreement is how we want to achieve it. And we are looking at the electricity sector, of course. Towards 2030, we want to take some big steps so that more than 70% of the energy supply will be renewable, or electricity supply will be renewable by 2030. But we're also looking into industry, taking measures in industry, agriculture, mobility, and housing and building.
That's quite impressive. You're addressing so many sectors, but of course that will be necessary.
Yeah, we think, as Magnus already mentioned, that is very important.
So how will you do that?
Well, 1.5 years ago, after the new cabinet started, they presented a plan. They wanted to reduce carbon with 49%. And then we felt that the best way to do it would be a climate agreement. It's an agreement with more than 150 parties, because we believe that we can only achieve these goals if we do it together. I mean, government is important, but it cannot act on its own. So
and when you mention parties, it cannot
like,
be political parties.
No, it's good that you ask. It's NGO, non-governmental organizations, it's companies, it's branch organizations, it's consumer organizations, housing corporations. So all kinds of groups that have to invest in climate change in the Netherlands. And they were agreeing on measures on different tables. The 5 tables I already mentioned for the 5 sectors I just mentioned. And they were each given an own indicative target, which was based on what would be the most cost-efficient way to do it. And that meant, especially in the electricity sector and industry sector, we have an ambitious target.
Was this exceptional from a Dutch perspective, the fact that you had these sector tables and that you took such a long time to involve many different stakeholders in the process?
Yeah.
Or is that the way you do politics in
That's
the
what
Netherlands?
we do in the Netherlands. We talk. We talk. I
And
think it's a
act
bit
as
like
well,
in
I hope.
Sweden, isn't it? It's a bit like in Sweden. Isn't
Yeah, well, I might actually have a question to you.
Yeah.
Do you think this gives this broad, sort of stable environment for people to invest in, sort of also politically?
Yeah, we hope it does. I mean, but also the Climate Act had nearly all parties voted for the act. So that's an important base.
Yeah.
And I think we will discuss the agreement next week this week actually in Parliament. And so we'll see how broad the support is.
What do you think?
We're hoping for a broad support. I think there will be a broad support.
Yeah.
Is there an alternative discussion anywhere, do you feel? Or because I really feel what you're doing now is the correct thing to do.
But what do you mean, alternative?
Is there an opposing view?
Yeah. Of course, there's an opposing view. We have the climate criticers. And what's a very, very important question for us in the Netherlands, but I think in all European countries, is we have to find a way to make a transition that is affordable and feasible for everyone.
Right.
So also for low-income groups, also for industry, because we would like industry to invest, we would not like them to leave.
No.
So those are huge challenges. And important questions we think we tackled with the agreement, but we have to see.
What about the affordability, if you spend some more time on that? Because that's
for example, we looked at in housing and building. Many houses they are now heated by natural gas, and they have to find alternative way to be heated. That takes investments in making your house more efficient, but also, for example, buying a heat pump. Although maybe it's affordable for some people, it's hard to finance because you don't have that money at once available. So we made making available. It's called a heating fund, and the government will put in about 50 to 80 million euros, and so will private parties. So people will be able to lend money, have a long time to pay back the loan. They have 25 years. And very low interest. So in that way, we try to make it possible for everyone. Yeah.
So maybe for the audience sake, just to the fact how integrated gas is into the citizens of the Netherlands.
Yeah, well, basically every house is heated on natural gas, and basically every house is still cooking on gas, also on gas. Yeah. So we're very, very dependent on natural gas, which is from a historic view also very logical, because we had a lot of gas. We still actually have a lot of gas, but we decided to stop producing gas in Groningen. Maybe you've read about it, but there have been many earthquakes.
The unconventional fracking.
Yeah. And so we have to go down in production, and we will go down by 2021. We will go down very quickly. Yeah.
So when will it be bye-bye gas in the Netherlands?
To be honest, I mean, that will take a long time because we're not dependent only on our own gas, but of course we're also importing gas. But we want to become, we have to be it's bye-bye gas by 2050, because then we want to be climate neutral.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Birgitta. We will come back to you in a moment, but I think we will cross the border and move over to Germany and invite Head of European Policy of German think tank Agora Energiewende, Matthias Buch. Please give him a warm hand. Welcome, Matthias. Sit in the middle, please. Welcome, Matthias. You have no Swedish roots?
No, I don't.
No?
But I'd love to be in Sweden.
It's wonderful to have you here. So we have now the German energy mix behind us, and still one can see then that also Germany has quite a big CO2 footprint still. And although there was a coal commission that came with its recommendation in Germany in the beginning of the year when it comes to phasing out of coal by 2038, there's still a need, many say, for Germany to put more ambitious decarbonization targets in place. then there are many different interests to balance here. We have a strong Fridays for the Future. We have a strong Green Party in Germany. But we also have many who worry about the car drivers, the house owners, the industry's competitiveness and so on. So what will happen in Germany, do you think? Will there be another yellow vest movement like in France, or will the politicians sort of push through stronger targets or more ambitious targets in Germany?
I think it's a very good question. This question has really been on the minds of the politicians and stakeholders working in the Coal Commission, because at the time the Coal Commission started its work, at the same time the Yellow Vest movement, the Gilets jaunes movement in France, started reacting to the carbon pricing concept of Macron. And so this really has been on the minds. Now, if you look to the German politics today, we will have regional elections in 3 East German Länder, which already have been, I would say, suffering from the transition from being former East German countries, communist economy, to the West German economic model.
And they're not
and there are parts of the population that feel excluded and left behind. And precisely in those countries are 2 of the coal mining regions where the transition must take place for climate reasons. So for this reason, one of the things we're observing at the moment in the German government is that they try to postpone the hard decisions on new climate legislation until after the regional elections in September.
I see.
Now, at the same time, of course, as you were saying, there's a very strong push by Fridays for Future, by the Green Party. The Green Party scored sensational results at the European election. So the government is currently struggling. How do they be seen keeping momentum while postponing until September?
If you compare to the Netherlands, where you have this process of really engaging many different stakeholders, and also here in Sweden, where we've managed to get sort of 5 political parties across a fairly broad spectrum. What's the situation in Germany there?
We also have a tradition of doing commissions. It's a bit differently organized than in the Netherlands. Possibly there's broader trust in experts in coming to decisions. We've had a nuclear phase-out commission. We've had a coal commission now. We're doing commissions to come to well-argued results. Now the coal commission proposal, although there is a lot of criticism on the end date, 2038, if you look at it as a package, it's historical. I would really claim it's historical because until very recently, many of you may not know in the room, but until recently Germany was #1 on the planet in terms of lignite mining and lignite consumption on this planet. Now we are moving out of coal by 2038. Of course, 2038 is only the end date. And there is a built-in agreement in the Coal Commission compromise to do it faster. Probably by 2035, I would expect even a bit before that date.
So what will happen then after coal in Germany? What role will gas play, for instance?
I'm not only commenting on Germany. When we have been, so a few years back, everybody was saying gas is the bridge from coal to renewables. We're not observing this. Wherever you're looking, you see the switch is directly from coal to renewables. Now, gas, of course, is playing a role, but it's more the backup role for ensuring security of supply, which is also very important. But in that context, gas is competing with other backup options, be it shifting demand up and down, be it in the European context in particular, cooperating in the power sector between different countries by greater enmeshing.
So if you go back a few years, did people think more that gas would be a longer-term bridge than what reality is showing now, that we're faster moving towards renewables than was anticipated? Is that the case, or?
We are certainly not scaling up gas now that we're moving out of coal. I think this is very clear. We will have a discussion. We have a very rigorous monitoring process now on security of supply issues in parallel to the coal phase down. Because we're also phasing out nuclear by 2022. To be very, so we're phasing out nuclear by 2022, and we will start phasing out coal. And there is a clear commitment to have 100% renewables as the basis of Germany, which is one of the leading industrial economies on the planet. So it's a very strong political commitment. So you need to be sure about security of supply. We will have a very rigorous monitoring of the security of supply situation. And if there is a problem, gas might come into the picture.
Right.
Also the question of how you finance gas in a situation where the wholesale electricity market is not offering the revenues to make those investments.
What about the transport sector and the development of e-mobility in Germany?
We have a huge challenge to reduce transport emissions, and not least thanks to the German car industry being very successful in lobbying the EU legislator not to be too tough on car efficiency standards. So there will be, like in the Netherlands and probably also in Sweden, a strong push by municipalities, by cities, to fast track the mobility transition to help people change their patterns of mobility as they do it today. And of course, this will be including incentives to get electric mobility faster into the market and to penalize perhaps the very polluting cars.
And you foresee that that will happen? Or
Absolutely, it's being discussed, and Germany is facing a difficult situation. By 2030, we must reduce emissions significantly, not only in the power sector, but also in the transport and building sector. Currently, the measures we have in place are not sufficient to that end. In the European context, it means if we are not delivering on our 2030 targets, we will need to buy surplus emissions from other member states, which will be very costly. And this 30 to 60 billion euros price tag that we have been calculating as Agora is now really on the minds of people working on new regulation.
Right. Maybe asking you, Magnus, now, we've heard both from Birgitta and Matthias about the developments in the Netherlands and in Germany. From a Vattenfall perspective, what does these developments mean for Vattenfall?
Well, I think for us it is creating new business opportunities. I think that's also where the really strong transition comes in, when we will see business looking at what they can do and create new businesses. And from our perspective, we look at the production side of electricity. Of course, we really truly believe in electrification as a solution, and then we need to be there to produce electricity based on climate neutral fuels, wind or some biofuels also. So I think in some parts. So we will do that. We are investing quite heavily in the Netherlands. We are doing that, and we will look for the opportunities in Germany also when it comes to wind power, and we do solar power as well. And then we go over to the consumption side, where we want to help our customers. And then, of course, e-mobility is a big thing for us, creating those charging infrastructure. And I think the discussion around Germany is particularly interesting because you do have the biggest and most important car manufacturers, most advanced car manufacturers in the world. And I cannot see how they can't it's very difficult for them because it's very costly, but there will be a change. And my take of Germany as a country is you wait a little bit, but when you go, you go. and so I think that will be happening, especially if you look at the car industry, when they suddenly see the opportunity there. And I think they're just waiting for this, because of course they understand the change is going to come, right? So and then we want to be there to supply that. Then of course we are big in heating, because it's also heat Wende in a sense.
Yes.
It's not only electricity, and there of course we are in Berlin. We have a clear target to phase out coal by 2030. We look at the intermediate of gas, like you said. We have invested in gas, but now of course we come closer to what is going to be the next generation solutions we need. In the Netherlands, we're looking at now as a transition of a biofuel base, but we want to look at third-party integration from heat sources. If you take data centers, for instance, they are 85% heat production and a few percent calculation. They will probably be close to the big cities, and there we are also in close connection to looking at what they can do in our district heating systems. So I think we're really, and then of course you just take the solutions to the customers, where you like heat pumps in. I think that will be the same. Probably, I think, in Germany, because you do have a lot of gas for individual heaters.
As well.
And then heat pumps will come there, and there's a big opportunity. But of course, you have to look at electricity being supplied then with fossil-free sources. So as we are really digging into this whole equation and looking at what the business opportunities are immense. It's more a question of where can we really sort of put our investment money and go for it. But the question from my side is that you have now a plan. Do you think that because I think you indicated it will actually accelerate as the politicians comes to sort of clarity on these issues. I think when you have this very broad consensus like you have in the Netherlands, I don't know, do you have a broad consensus in Germany around this? Is that your feeling? Or, I mean, because that's also very important, I think.
I think the interesting situation in Germany at the moment is that politics are behind the developments amongst industry, amongst the power sector actors, some of the car companies. They are willing to move. They're asking for clarity on the speed and the direction. And for the particular situation of the German politics at the moment, the politicians do not dare to lead at the moment. But
until after
it will change. We have had Volkswagen, the CEO, coming out very strongly, aggressively almost on electric mobility. We know BDI is supporting deep decarbonization pathways, so the main federation of German industry, which traditionally has been very skeptical of climate politics. So things are changing rapidly, and there's a sense that now we really need to take decisions. So I'm very much.
But also in this area, will it be the case that they're waiting for the Bundesländer in Eastern Germany to have the elections?
As I was saying, that's really one of the problems. And the AfD at the moment is polling first or second. Really at the same level as the Christian Democrats, as the strongest party.
So it will be exciting times in the later in the year, for sure.
I think it's exciting.
Let's move over to another exciting country, which is the UK. And we're very pleased to announce that we have a non-executive director of Energy System Catapult and SGN, Laura. Welcome very much. Give her a warm hand, please. Very good to have you here as well, Laura. You're representing the UK.
Here. Fantastic.
So, Laura, you have a lot of different hats, and one of them is also that you are a founder of the company called Challenging Ideas, where energy is one of the policy areas that you study. But you're also a former member of the British Parliament. This is a little bit of a calmer setting than maybe what you're used to.
I love all your coalition politics. My God, if only.
Yeah, well, it's inspiring, isn't it? So you then represented the Tories, and I know that you campaigned to remain when it comes to Brexit. Let's then still assume that Brexit goes ahead. And of course, you know, what's going to happen, let's wait and see. Absolutely. But there is the referendum in any case. What sort of climate change or climate relationship do you think there should be between the EU and the UK in that case going forward?
Well, I think the first issue is really how the UK looks at climate change, and very, very bizarrely, in a very fractured country at this moment, the legislation for net zero, which went through last week, which is an extraordinary achievement, wasn't even voted on because there was no opposition, right? So on everything, everybody is screaming at each other, except, it seems, on climate change, which is quite unusual and also quite a turnaround. So I would say that Brexit, I mean, there's the European trading system, there are all sorts of different European mechanisms. I wouldn't say that climate change policy in the UK is going to be impacted that much by Brexit.
I see.
A whole load of other things will be. However, everyone's political space is going to be diverted. And also, as we all know, climate change does have a cost, and it has winners and losers. And at a time when you've got lots of volatility politically, and also possibly lots of checks that have got to be signed to farmers to keep them happy, etc., you have got a difficult moment to start creating a sort of transformation plan.
Right. But so
I think the will is there. The how is a real problem, and then actually the headspace.
But what about the how then? Because yes, you have the 2050, the net zero target for 2050, which is a great accomplishment to have that at least. But then the how, and you know, what are the major gaps that need to be closed in order to?
Well, I think very interesting you talk about coal in particular. We set a date to take coal right off the system in 2023. And I was with somebody from the department, the business department, who's saying, it's going to be much quicker than that. Because once government actually gives indication and gives a sense of direction, in some ways, actually business is very, very flexible to actually innovate, develop new solutions, and actually understand that that's the movement of where things are going. So
that's quite encouraging, right?
I mean, it is pretty encouraging. So we've been very successful, I think, in the UK in what I call macro policy. When it actually comes to action, other than the great Vattenfall and lots of other offshore wind firms, we have had some big gaps. Energy efficiency, rubbish in the UK. Okay? That's the polite term. We've got issues around heat, which I know we both have as a major issue. We think it's going to be very much a mixed heat economy, not just electrification. It's going to be around geography, location, applicability, right? And then obviously when it comes to industry and the decarbonisation there, I'm very much involved in carbon capture, sort of technologies, and we're looking at doing 3 pilots. But we've got to turbocharge all of this because actually it is a transformation. There are going to be bad choices, it's going to be messy, there are going to be problems, and anybody who says this is going to be absolutely clear is actually conning the public, and that's what we've got to do. We've got to start experimenting with a lot of R&D.
One thing that's a little bit unique with the UK is that you said that nuclear will be part of the solution, and that decision was perhaps taken when one didn't quite see the full potential of how fast renewables were going to sort of develop.
I don't know what my chart looks like.
It's right behind you here now. But so, you know, will there be new nuclear in the UK, do you think?
Go back 5 years, there would have been new nuclear, yes. Due to actually what the offshore wind sector has done in reducing prices, I mean, like super dramatically, with extraordinary prices coming through, I think nuclear's dead. Not on an ideological basis, on a cost basis. And so fundamentally, we've got this bit of what I might call a white elephant, but don't mention that to EDF, that we're building at the moment. And they want to build a second one and all the rest of it.
You don't think it's going to happen?
But I also think that one of the things that maybe we might not also be appreciating is that energy is not going to be just the big and the bold. It's going to be very distributed. We need a very different type of person, type of organizations within the energy sector, looking at digitalization, system optimization, smart grids, mobility, playing with heat, playing with data centers.
Many more components part of the bigger system.
It's going to become much more complex, much more resilient in my view, and actually we can start picking off pieces to decarbonize in a systems way, but it is not going to be, as we say in Britain, you know, my wind farm is bigger than yours. It's going to be, my wind farm is smarter than yours. It is more applicable for the needs of the customer.
Let's spend a few minutes or a little bit on gas as well, because there are some gas fields also in the UK, unconventional gas. You know, will there be fracking in to get that out of the ground, do you think?
I really doubt it. It was a great idea of one chancellor, and he thought it was going to be the US of Europe. And actually, I mean, one of the things that I know everyone's talked about, it's really important, we need public acceptance of what we do. And there is no way that fracking is going to happen in the UK other than in a very marginal sense. Actually, the geology isn't right. It's not the same as the States. The access, all sorts of other things. It seemed like a good idea because it was what's called in energy fashion.
At the time. It changed also quickly.
I think it's over. But I do think we need to start moving very quickly on hydrogen solutions for our, because to go into everybody's home, everyone thinks, oh, let's electrify or whatever, but to go into everyone's home, rip out their boiler, change their radiators, oh my God. That's a big political
huge undertaking. Yeah.
So, and electrolysis with offshore wind is a really great layered solution.
Should we ask Magnus, before we invite you in the audience to ask questions, what about from a Vattenfall perspective, when you hear the comments from Laura and the development?
I mean, other than the politics. Okay?
No, let's start. I mean, I often get the question now with Brexit and everything, are you going to continue to invest in the UK? And I said, yes. Because really, we see that the UK has such a big transition to go through, and there is clear commitment from the British government and from the people's side to do this. So what we can contribute to is, of course, offshore wind, which is one of our favorites, so to speak. And I think if it's going to replace nuclear, I'm not sure, but it's really about the costs have come down, and they can really produce 4,500 hours or something like that. So they're really becoming like a base load issue. And if you take the Netherlands, northern part of Germany, of course, there is a lot more room for you have a bigger problem with the transformation or transition down to the south. So certainly you're endowed with a lot of coast and waters, and of course that will happen. What we as a company look specifically into the UK is the heat thing, because you are, sorry to say, underdeveloped in terms of the heat thing. I don't think I go on sacred ground to say that. It's okay. That's a better word for it. but it's really about, and we are specializing in that. So what we will do to start with is about big new housing complexes. Then we will introduce like a district heating system or a sort of a big centralized system for that. And then you start building, and then you connect it to the right way. The big question is, of course, how are you going to change what is already there? And because that is, of course, a big issue. And I think you have to go down that route in one way or another. If it's hydrogen as a gas to replacement, I'm a little bit dubious, questionable about that. But one thing I would like to send with you if you come back to the parliament is that the no way. Okay, the cheapest way of producing electricity is actually wind onshore.
Yes.
And there UK has sort of said no, unless you really, there is no...
taken away from the
subsidy system in there, nor stabilizing. We don't really need a subsidy. We need a price stabilizer. That's all we need. And I think the UK has
maybe
shown
the
that
Tories
before.
can commit to something here.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a sort of ideological, religious problem that we've got
probably like you
on
said.
it. And actually what's happening is a lot of industrials are putting on onshore wind on their own. And I think that will start to erode. And I think we'll get onshore wind as well without a question. But in inappropriate places and,
I think that could be a pragmatic solution to that,
absolutely.
Probably.
I think I'm sure.
So we're really, I mean, also into the UK.
And I have to say, you had a wind farm in my old constituency, and you were great corporate citizens and really set a very different standard for how you engage with the public in a very, very deprived part of the UK. So
that's very good. That's nice to hear.
Good to hear. Let's see if we have any questions from the audience. Then I will throw this at you, so please catch it. And hold the black side to your then state your name, please.
Okay. Yeah. I would like to take a question regarding the needs of a trade agreement for UK, whatever happened. But I'm a Londoner. I'm living in London, but I'm a Swede. But I'm very much looking for Vattenfall and district heating solution in UK. It must be a very good opportunity for Vattenfall to go in much bigger into the UK market, because they need their help.
Yeah, if I may, I mean, yes, as I said, I mean, we really view that as a business opportunity. And I think we talk about Energiewende, but it's a big part of that is Heatwende. It's a change of the heat system as well.
Absolutely.
And so certainly we believe that there are solutions which are sustainable solutions for the future, which we will then start introducing also into the UK, whereas we do it in Germany and we're big in the Netherlands as well. So we really look at that as a possibility for us.
I mean, I would say, first of all, you're most welcome in London, and fantastic to have so many people from Europe actually in the UK, and everyone from our point of view is, extremely welcome. The issue about heat is, in many ways, is the fabric of our buildings as well. And so, and to be frank, again, I come back to this thing about solutions. And solutions will be different in different environments, with different layers. And in some ways, what the energy sector has been very good at is, here is my product, you fit into my product. Actually, particularly on the heat side, it's a very, very different relationship.
So the energy companies need to become more customer-centric
Exactly,
and adaptable. Let's have another question. We have one here and then another one over there. Please state your name.
Thank you. My name is Mats Ringborg. I have a question primarily for Mr. Howard. How do you see the prospects for electricity exports from Sweden, or rather from the Nordic countries, to continental Europe and Poland? The idea, of course, is that such clean electricity from us could replace coal-fired and gas-fired electricity generation in these countries.
Good, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very relevant question. I think a lot of the discussion around in Europe now becomes about self-sufficiency on electricity, whereas we trade on all other products. So it's a little bit strange in that sense. I think that you should, and we are looking at connecting more and more with the connectors in between Germany and the Netherlands. UK goes into France and into the Netherlands, and probably we are looking at connecting the UK to Norway with one of our cables. I think we need a lot more of that, and that's to integrate, but also you can then use, of course, the Nordic system, which has more renewable flexibility in it, and I think that's part of the value, and then we need to see how we can get paid for that sort of flexibility in the end. But
so there is a lot of nodding heads here.
Yes, I mean the whole Scandinavia is like a battery for the northwestern Europe. So it's very important for us to be very interconnected with Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Germany, and even the UK.
And you nod as well, Matthias.
I was about to say exactly the same. For us, Scandinavia is the battery.
But isn't there also more of a discussion around the countries being more self-sufficient at the same time? More of that in the debate now than a few years back.
Yes, it is. For example, we are also going to stop using coal for electricity production by 2030, and from a national point of view, that's a very effective instrument when you regard carbon emissions. But at the same time, you do not want to have the effect that in Germany, the carbon-fired electricity plants will produce more, because then you get more carbon, and we import German electricity. So we are very happy with the advice of the Coal Commission, so that also coal will be phased out there. I think in Europe, we need to make a coordinated and integrated policy. It's very important. At the same time, self-sufficiency is also, it's a good way, we discussed it yesterday, to have the discussion on why you need to have wind parks on land, why you need to have solar on your roofs, because you have to realize it does come from somewhere. In a densely populated country like the Netherlands, it's very difficult to get public support for wind parks on land, for example. And then it's very good to get the community involved, discussed why you need the wind.
Sure.
And at the same time, we should realize that international trade will always be a very important part of both heating and electricity.
Yeah.
I agree. So, I think that there is a lot of explaining to do for politicians that this concept of energy sovereignty, at least in Europe, doesn't really apply. And nobody's talking about the very high integration of markets in the gas, whereas in electricity, there's a lot of concern. And of course, we have exactly the same discussions in Germany. What if we phase down coal, and Poland sticks to coal, and we're interconnected?
Yes.
So exactly the same discussion, and for that reason, it's very important that we as countries in Europe collaborate in the European Union context to have common targets that we all stick to, and then really reduce the emission intensity of the mix.
Totally agree.
Good, thank you. We have another question. Are you ready? Please
Hello.
state your name. And
Yes, my name is Ingrid Westman, and my company is Friendly Power, and we sell solar panels. I have a question about the Swedish energy laws. They are from the 1920s, as I've heard. They're very old-fashioned, and they are in the way to make this development quicker. In my point of view, they are written for the suppliers, for Vattenfall and E.ON. It's to protect you, so we don't start our own little networks. But this is exactly what we need, small networks for energy. So can you see a way to make this go quicker. To write a new law, I've understood, takes years and years and years. But you in each company can decide that it's okay, you can make your own network here if you want to.
I can comment on that. I think there will be more discussions around this as we have something called energy communities in the European Union legislation coming up, where you will be able to form under certain circumstances your own networks with production and consumption and regulation. So there is a discussion around that, and I think the best thing for us is just to wait and see what comes and then adapt to that. I think it's going in the direction you want, and I don't know, Matthias, you're nodding. I think that's something which is being discussed also in other countries. I think.
So as part of the new legal framework for Europe for 2030 on climate and energy, in the new European Renewable Energy Directive, there's for the first time what we call a subjective right of citizens collaborating on renewable energy to self-produce, self-consume, and to deliver sell to the grid. The specifics need to be worked out in each country, but the discussion will need to happen in all countries where this does not yet exist.
I mean, there's also in the UK quite a few independent networks that set up around new build, around new situations, and they can be community owned as well as privately owned. So,
Magnus?
We're doing exactly that in the UK. I forgot to say that. We're building small networks for industry establishments and things like that, where we actually the independent network owner. So it happens.
We don't.
Well, it's a law. I mean, we're not the
legislator.
We're not the legislator. I think you will see this coming into the European discussion. Absolutely certain.
All right. A few other comments on who's going to pay, because this is a major thing, still, and a big debate. What do you say? You have written also. You've studied this. Societal sort of justice when it comes to the energy transition.
So not on the scale of your commissions, but I'm co-chairing a commission in the UK on environment and social justice. Now, I totally believe in social justice, but even if you didn't and you were only looking at climate change, without it being a just settlement, these policies will not last. So there is absolutely no sustainability to these policies unless we build in social justice, longevity, and actually, to be frank, a bit of intergenerational justice as well. But I do think that we don't talk enough about people, public, and actually their ability to accelerate this transition if we properly give them the tools. You talked about mobility. I was with some young people at a university, and there were about 300 of them, and I asked them at the end, do you want to own a car? And about 15% of them put their hands up. So I think, there are much more fundamental changes going on that we all need to really understand and engage with, and maybe as politicians listen as well.
And we heard a concrete example from the Netherlands with the heat boilers and the loans.
At the same time, we should realize that in the end, no matter how we distribute the costs, citizens pay. I mean, even if companies have to pay first, we will have to pay a higher price for the product we buy. And therefore, we think a cost-efficient approach is extremely important. So we have to do especially much there where technologies are relatively cost efficient right now. For example, renewable energy is really becoming more and more cost efficient. And we have to innovate and learn a lot about making housing fully renewable, because costs are still higher there. So, I mean, in looking where you go and what you do first, you really have to take this cost efficiency into account.
Perhaps 2 points. I think it's important to point out, according to all studies that have been done over the past years, 5 years ago, we would have said the clean energy transition is costly, more costly than just sticking to what we do. Today, this is not anymore the case. So it's clearly economically beneficial from an all society perspective to invest into clean energy and to go through the transition. What is important and what makes it different from the current energy system is that the upfront investment costs are higher for the clean energy system than they've been for the old energy system. This means we need to watch out for who cannot shoulder the costs for the investments, being in the building stock, in electric mobility, etc., etc. So this is really at its core a political challenge. So just transition is about who is carrying the investment costs and who cannot. This is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I can only underline what you're saying, and it's like a capital intensity is much higher, but the fuel cost is very low. So it's the solution for the long term is really good. It's just the transition is a problem, and the next phase is going to be a real challenge on how we're going to construct the market so that we will pay for people who want to invest. Take the combination of people who are going to pay for the service of having electricity available, and then also the investors, because now we have what we call an energy-only market, which means that on the margin we put the price for gas or coal or whatever it is. That's perhaps not going to work out as many hours as you need for the future, and then you will have really low prices. So I also think that the current setup needs to be reinvested anyhow if you kept on going like that, right? And people tend to forget that. It's like a 25-year depreciation horizon that you continue to replace things, and now you replace with renewables. So I think, but this discussion is really important, and you were mentioning that because it's about a just transition to make sure that we treat people in a fair way, distribute the costs right, but it's also fair transition, like in Germany in the Lausitz area, where we previously owned a lignite business. It's about their new life is going to be, what are they going to do? We can't leave them totally, or Poland for that reason, out of the system or the question. So it has to be on the European level a very sort of thought through sort of balancing of these acts, because if we do not, then I think we're in deep problem of actually getting this change done.
Talking about European level here, if the three of you can ask Magnus now, because Magnus is not only the president CEO of Vattenfall, but he's also the chairman of Eurelectric since May.
May.
Sort of running the industry organization across all of the European countries when it comes to electricity companies. So what would you expect
from Europe?
From Eurelectric in this case? What can Eurelectric do to help make energy transition happen in your countries?
Well, I think first of all, I mean, I have a wish list. First of all, I really hope Europe will agree first on climate neutrality by 2050, because having the long-term goal we just spoke about it, then business will move because they are so flexible. So this target is very important. We also think we need a higher target for 2030 that is in line with the 2050 target. And if you have these targets and you combine them with good European regulation, we believe this transition could go very quickly. Also, I don't know in what sense it's European or Eurelectric discussion, but a fair transition also in Europe is a discussion we have to have. I mean, there are some countries who have much more difficulty with this transition. How can we work together to make the transition European? Because that's the only way forward, I think.
You're making notes now.
I have my
mental notes.
but I think it fits very well with what we're. I can come back to
Matthias,
that.
So Eurelectric stands out because, as an association, you committed to carbon neutrality by 2045.
Yeah.
So faster than actually what's being debated politically for the whole of Europe. To me, the big thing is the new budget. You must know the European budget is not an annual budget, but a 7-year budget. So the next budget cycle in Europe will be the budget to get us on course for the transition through the next decade. It's the budget. We cannot anymore afford subsidizing fossil. We cannot anymore afford investing into new gas infrastructure, where we've already significantly overinvested. Of course, upgrading to green gases might be something to look at. But in principle, we cannot afford investing in stuff which we really do not need, and we must invest in things that we know we need. And this is very much just transition. It's a mobility transition to roll out the charging infrastructure across the continent so that you can actually use your electric car not only in your city but everywhere. To standardize for charging infrastructure, to do all the practical things Europe can do very well. but it's really budget. It's about the money at the moment.
Yeah. What do you say, Laura?
For Euroelectric, I love you to think about planning from the future rather than to the future, in a sense. And that destination, we don't quite know what it looks like, but that will start to accelerate things. And I think the really important points being made today, number one is how do we cost energy? And it's a unit cost against a fossil fuel price, which is not what we've got. It's a capital asset that the asset needs to be sweated, it needs to be optimized. In some ways, I think one needs a totally different metric around that. And then I think there has to be, as you rightly say, Brigitte, is this issue around losers. And when we start to look at certain industries, actually we should be thinking about building a 21st century modern clean economy and actually rejecting the 19th century dirty, old-fashioned, rather unproductive economy. And it should be an aspiration. Not and if we can take that with us, there will be bumps in the road. But actually, that is really exciting for all citizens, particularly, kids who are around now. They will benefit from it.
And I think a huge opportunity for Europe in the world.
Right.
So
probably uniquely.
Yeah.
Other than
I totally believe in creating the target up front and then sort of getting everything done to go there.
Yes.
And that's how we think in Euroelectric. We have 3 points which we are proposing. One is to help climate neutrality by 2045 or 2050, more in line with the EU, by use of electrification to a very big extent. And then we have to commit to decarbonize our electricity. And the third thing is actually this fair and just transition, so that because we will not make this happen unless we have that under control. And we can sort of work with that, but it needs the involvement, of course, like say budget, the different governments and all the things. We have quite a strong alignment in our group, but still the people are connected to the German government, of course, some companies, and they need to feel there is a very clear support for this climate neutrality goal by the German government, for instance. So we need to unite on a European level, I think.
You have one further comment.
I just wondered whether we should be measuring carbon consumption and not carbon emissions, because actually what we're doing globally, because this is not us, it's the world, we are actually just we're exporting our emissions, and in many ways that carbon consumption dimension is quite an interesting metric, which throws up a totally different set of outcomes.
That's interesting. Maybe it's a topic for our next seminar as well. So with that, I believe I will give the word to you, Magnus, to close this seminar. Say perhaps a few words about, Vattenfall has the target to make it possible to live free of fossil fuels within one generation. Sort of what does that mean, and what would you like to see happening sort of in...
Yeah, I mean, we have this clear target to make fossil-free living possible within one generation. And it's really about the commitment to the next generation of people. Those who are born today, when they get their kids, Vattenfall should be at that position. And I think it's so much about the commitment to our children for the next. We don't want them to think that they're not going into a future which is not there. That's absolutely a no-go area. So from our perspective, what do we want? We want to play along with what you're doing. A few messages, of course. I think the German transition, the EG, there is a problem in Germany because electricity is extremely expensive right now. That needs to change in one way or another, so we can actually make electrification. Because if you have a car in Germany right now and you go from a diesel car to an electrical car, the savings that should really be there in terms of energy consumption. It's not there because you have to pay the EGs. But then we are in all these 3 markets, we are committed to take our part. I talk about district heating, I talk about renewables, I talk about delivering services to the electric transportation, and there are many different solutions to that, not only charging. There will also be hydrogen for big trucks and everything. And so from Vattenfall perspective, in your markets, we're going to be there to help you get the climate neutrality by 2045, let's say like that, or 2050.
Thank you.
We're playing
Thank you.
Very good. I think we should all give a really warm hand to our panelists here. And thank you all very much to the audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.